Okay, I want to really quick show you a neat little terrain technique. And I'll show you a few extra things about terrains, in case you didn't know or not. I'm gonna load in a procedural terrain, and I want to go ahead and constrain this on the Z, and I'm gonna lift it up a bit, so we have kind of a mountain looking terrain. And maybe I'll raise it up even a little bit higher. One thing I want to note is that if you double-click and go to your terrain editor, as you can see, as that it's evaluating, and as we make changes, and this is for procedural terrains only. As we make a change to the procedural terrain, if we click OK too quickly before we re-evaluate our terrain, we will get some errors. And I'll show you that right now. I'm going to change our scale to 0.5 and click OK. And as you can see, we have a few problems. Mostly the main problems are we have this kind of capped out region on the tops of our peaks. As you can see right here where we have our flat areas. And the reason for that is we did not totally evaluate. We also have some little bits and pieces kind of sticking up around our terrain. And now if you're looking to create this kind of effect, that is definitely the way to do it. But if you want something a little more realistic and you don't want to have to deal with kind of these display errors, you want to make sure that when you're in the terrain editor that you're letting it recalculate. So now that it's recalculated, we can click OK, and you'll see those peaks be restored. And we also have our outside edges. So you want to make sure that you're always letting that completely finish evaluating itself to the point where the bar is all the way across, just because you can get some display issues. So you just want to make sure everything is all ready to go before you go ahead and click OK, because, like I said, it can cause some display errors. Unless you're looking for that specific kind of a look, you could actually use that to your advantage. But other than that, otherwise, that could be some some problems. But one neat little thing I want to show you here, we're actually going to be using the twist tool. And this is going to kind of create a rock overhang. And you can use this technique for lots of different methods of terrain creation. So the first thing I want to do after we have our procedural terrain, using the default settings after it's been raised up a bit, I'm going to go to this middle tab up on top here, which is going to give us our numeric values for changing our position and our size and things like that. We also have a twist function, which is down here. And it's really not so much of a twist as it is sort of a skew, because it's not physically twisting anything, it's kind of skewing it off to the side. So it's really more of a skew tool. But what we're going to do is grab our Z to Y and go ahead and pull that over. And as you can see, it's kind of squishing it, but it's also skewing it as well. And now we have this overhang in here. So if we take a look at our terrain from the side, we can see our terrain is kind of shooting out of the ground and jetting out of the ground, and we have this nice little overhang. And this effect could not be achieved with regular edits in the terrain editor, because it's virtually impossible considering the fact that we have a vertically placed projection of the terrain. You also notice too that we do have a bit of stretching in here. And actually, if we take a look, that stretching really can't be undone, considering this technique. That is going to happen just a bit. You can edit some of it within the function editor, editing sort of the scale on the Z-axis. And we'll go ahead and give that a try right now. Just double-click on the terrain, and in the procedural function here, we're going to edit the function. And just kind of try to fix this. And on the Z, we have 1. And we want to change our wavelength, make it a little bit smaller, and about half to 0.5, and click OK. And it's not really going to make much of a change in here, but it might make a change when we take a look at our actual terrain, just so we can kind of get rid of that stretching. And you can see we've gotten rid of a lot of it. We've added a little more depth because of that, but you're still going to get an amount of stretching with this technique. So kind of keep that in mind. But it's a really neat way to kind of create these overhangs, which you would not be able to create within View normally. So we have a really neat looking rock there. And you can use this for a variety of different methods, depending on how you model your actual terrain. You could actually create cliffs and canyons and things like that. What we have to do is, if we notice, our terrain is still straight. We haven't rotated it. We've just kind of skewed it off to the side. Because if we rotated it, then we'd have edges sticking out, and this is just giving you another ability to create this kind of effect without having to rotate the terrain and still having that nice bend in there. But if you wanted to create more of a canyon and have this section higher, because as you can see it kind of slopes, because we are using kind of a mountain effect for this, but it slopes upward and then comes down. If you wanted kind of a consistency up here where it goes straight across and then comes down, as more of like you would see maybe with a riverbed or a canyon or something like that, you would actually have to edit the terrain before you go in and make any changes. And we might even be able to make some changes now with that. Well, what you can do is just kind of raise up one side, the opposite side of the side you're skewing, and that way, once it gets squished down, if we start out with our terrain really high up here that slopes down this way, once we skew it, that will kind of level out. So you want to play around with it a little, see what you can do with it. The skew, or well, actually, the twist tool is really neat because you can just do some cool stuff with it. But it can be a little touchy. I would not suggest using the numeric values down here because that will kind of rotate it around in different ways, and even undoing those can be quite difficult. If we go in and add a little bit in here, as you can see, it's stretching everything out and it's rotating it around, and that's not the effect we're going for at all. And if I undo it, and we're back to -26 where we were before, you can see our terrain is, well, it's sticking into the ground now. It's not skewed at all, and that might just be a bug within View right now, and maybe that'll get fixed. But right now you want to stick to these actual sliders right here, and you don't want to be using the Y to X for this. You just want to use the Z to Y or the Z to X, and that'll give you that effect we had before. I'm going to delete this right now and show you can also do this large scale. So if you don't just want to do individual little peaks sticking out of the ground, you want to have a bunch of them. We can do a procedural terrain. We'll double click on that, and I'm going to turn off zero edges. And this way we get our nice full terrain mapped, and if I go to our 3D view, we can see that a little bit better. And I'm going to bring our scale down to 0.5, and then click OK. So now one thing we can do with this then is use the twist tool again and add that slant once again, and we're just going to do just a little this time. And it all depends on how high the terrain is, because eventually it will flatten out. But as you can see, we have that nice flowing peaks all going off to the right, which is giving a pretty neat effect. So you can do some really cool stuff with that. And we'll go in there and take a look at that preview. And like I said, if you want, you could go into the function editor and change that z-axis a little, so maybe it can reduce that stretching. We'll just go ahead and do that right now. Hit edit function, and we're probably going to drop down a little bit smaller than 0.5. We'll bring it to about 0.2 and actually see what happens. So you can see that even takes effect in our little preview right here. But it won't make too much of a difference in the up and down. But once we kind of skew it off, it should make a small bit of difference at least enough to be able to see it. We can see we've reduced the stretching on some of the major areas. It is going to be in there a little, but this is a really cool way to just get some neat effects. You can do a lot of overlaying materials this way, and just some very interesting looking terrains that you, like I said, you would not be able to achieve normally just by using the standard terrain editor. And this works with both standard terrains and procedural terrains, so don't worry about being confined by a specific type of terrain, because it does work with both. Although I always like using the procedural terrains, because then you can get that nice infinite detail in there and zoom in as far as you want. Like I said, it can be a little touchy, and we even have a few spots in here that actually look like they might even be penetrating the ground plane. We have these little blank spots right here. But if I go ahead and delete the ground plane and we take a look at it, those are actually removed. But sometimes you might even get those artifacts if you don't let it completely refresh itself while you're making these terrains. As I showed you before, like I said, if you don't let it reevaluate once you've made changes, before you click the OK, it can produce some display errors. Another thing too is you want to make sure you're certain of how far you want to go with this, because if we go to try to skew it again, you're going to notice it's going to jump around, and we're going to get the same effect that we had before when we went and used the numeric values, where we're pretty much back where we started, except that we have our terrain just rotated, and it's not skewed at all anymore, or twisted. So you want to make sure that you have the set value the first time you do it. And like I said, I'm not sure if that's a bug or not, or if that's just how touchy this tool is. But just make sure that you have it set the first time you do it. So kind of keep in mind, you might want to play around with it to know exactly how far you need to go. I wouldn't make any major decisions, maybe your first time. Nothing to affect it too majorly, because like I said, it'd be very difficult to reset, and even if we hit undo, if we can try to go back, we got a lot of camera movement in there, and we did kind of bring it back a little, but it's still producing this strange effect. So it does jump around a little. Hopefully they'll fix that problem in the future, and you might be able to use it a little more efficiently, sorry. But right now, this is all you can really do with it. But it is a really neat effect, and I just thought I'd show it to you. So you can start using that for different things to create some nice overhangs, and you could have plants hanging over the side of that, maybe some custom plants, you make in their plant editor, or maybe a nice little ecosystem on there. So it's really a lot I can do with it. And because it is a little jumpy, one thing you could actually do too is once you actually have that set terrain, go ahead and export it. Maybe freeze the object and export it. We could bake to polygons and give it a polygon amount. The only problem is then we lose our procedural value. So depending on how complex the terrain really is, sometimes you can just save it or export it and just kind of give that a try to maybe preserve that, and or you could just stay away from editing our twist functions once we've made that actual change, so that we don't get any weirdness like we have kind of displaying right now.